Hey everybody, welcome back, and especially welcome back, Catherine, because you were on vacation for the last two episodes. So very happy to have you back. How have you been?
Super excited.
And yeah, how are you? What did you do? We want to know. The audience wants to know.
Well, I was world traveling. I went to 3 countries for 2 months. Was in the Philippines, Japan, and Mexico.
Wow.
And so just getting to see a lot of family, exploring, also getting to spend time in Japan with a big group of friends. Just a lot of fun, disconnecting from the design systems world. I don't even know what a component is anymore. So you guys might need to remind me when we get back.
Good. That sounds like great vacation. So I'm super happy for you. Hey Chris, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. Back to school. So, did the whole first day of school with my kindergartner, which was adorable and amazing. And again, much like Catherine, I didn't think about components for a little bit. So, that was good. So, like, personal life's been rocking and rolling. Staying busy at work. We got lots of stuff going on. But it's been, an exciting month, and I'm eager to dive in.
Yeah, it's funny because I definitely feel like that first day of school feel right for us, but like all getting back together and feeling, it's September. I think there's like definitely this energy of like, hey, let's get back to it, and hopefully everybody feel energized by their summer. I hope we get somewhat nice weather still, but yeah, I'm here for that. Cool. Well, let me introduce, or actually, Chris, maybe you can do that. But we have a very special guest today. Her name is Maya Hampton. So, hi, Maya. And
Yeah.
Chris.
Hey, Maya. Thanks so much for coming on the program. We've known each other for a few years now, and followed what you've been doing at REI with great interest through the various twists and turns. So, really stoked to have you on. Really appreciate you coming in and jamming with us.
Yeah, great to see you guys this morning. Happy to always talk about design systems.
Oh no, we're talking about vacation today. Where did you go?
Okay, we can talk about
I
vacation.
mean,
I got one of those in
she
a
has a
couple weeks
fishing
too.
poster. There's a fishing poster behind her.
Okay, right on. Sorry, what? Am I right that Maya, you're more the product side of things?
Correct. Yes, I'm the product manager for our design system at REI.
I think you're maybe the first product person to be invited in this show, which I think is really cool because I personally feel like most of the times, like people think of design system of primarily design because it has design in it. And the next one is engineering. But I feel like product is oftentimes, the ones that is like less visible or present. But yeah, I think it's like I wish it was more product people actually talking about design systems. So I'm personally super excited to have you on board. How do you feel about that, by the way? Design, engineering, product. What is your take on this?
I mean, I think, we make up a pretty great product trio, able to kind of bring in business requirements, but also ground that in what are the solutions we're going to put out that actually are going to help the designers and engineers that we work with. And then also trying to, bridge the gap with other product managers who may not understand what they're adopting or not understand why we have to upgrade to the latest version of Vue or whatever is coming out. And so there's a lot of that kind of constant selling and adoption conversations and just, reiterating the value, as well as kind of being able to reach out and be like, hey, what are you guys working on? What's on your roadmap that maybe we want to be able to support? Or maybe that could be something that goes back into the system, shared with other teams. What are you all learning? So there's really a lot we can get from that product perspective, as well as kind of the core design and engineering user base.
For sure.
I think it's interesting that product ends up being this kind of like lightning rod for the pain that design systems help solve. We honestly, like, when we sell Knapsack, we mostly sell to product people. And the reason why is largely they're the ones that are responsible for the harmonization of what design designs and what engineering builds. And that tends to be really hard because product people don't often own those design resources or those engineering resources, but they're responsible for that product output. And when you have things like VQA or a design review of the actual product itself, it's often the product person that's looked at as the responsible party for the harmonization of design and engineering. And so while I agree with you, Christoph, like it's not necessarily a highly visible role, I kind of think of it as like the main stakeholder in the design systems process, where like, look, your life gets improved a lot if you're an engineer, your life gets improved a lot if you're a designer, but the person whose pain you're really solving is the product person's.
Thanks. I think, and yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you. It's just that I feel like commonly product people are not as visible as others.
Oh, totally.
And I think it's too bad. I think I want more of them present, if anything. Cool.
I spent a part of my career in product, and so it's like I get a little triggery when it comes to the conversation around product swirl and design.
Yeah, it's all good. Okay, maybe before we get to like meatier topics, let's talk about, like what is happening in the wonderful world of design system and development and stuff like that. And I feel like the first thing that I want to point out is the fact that Clarity is coming up. It's in November 1st and 2nd. I just bought my ticket, so I will be there, and I hope to see you all there also in real life. But who's coming? Who already had their ticket?
I need to buy mine.
Yeah, we got a thread going on right now in Slack about who all is going from Knapsack. So there's probably gonna be 4 or 5 Knapsackers there.
Nice. What about you, Maya? Do you plan on being there?
Yeah, we're still going to look at tickets, I think, if we're able to go in person. Is there a remote option this year or virtual?
I don't think so. I think I've seen somewhere that it's, kind of like back to, and I think, first of all, I'm not sure. I think I heard Gina said that it would be like more like the idea is to have like a smaller form and being all there. But my guess is that at very least all the talks will be recorded, and so you will access to them later. But yeah, also want to point out that obviously, like for the people that are announced, I feel like Donnie was with us not so long ago. Gina was on the Design Social Club. Hillig is going to talk to. He's also part of the Design System Social Club at some point. Nathan was invited too. So I feel like, we're all in good company there. And I'm definitely looking forward to see you all. And maybe actually that's a question. What are you most excited about like going to a design system conference? Obviously, Clarity is, in my opinion, the one to be. But like in general, what are you most excited about when you go there?
I got a lot of new people on the team, and it's hard still, despite the fact that it's more and more common to find people with design systems experience. It's hard to find a lot of engineers and designers that have spent a lot of time working in the field. And so getting to introduce a lot of these concepts to new members of the team, even though they work on a design system platform every single day, I'm really excited about that. I also happen to love community. I come from the world of Drupal, which always had like a really strong community. And it was one of the things that I loved most about working inside of that community was not necessarily the work itself, but the community that came with it. And I appreciate so much having a conference where we all get to collectively share ideas and spend time with one another.
Cool.
I feel like for me, this year, we had more of those conferences back in person and getting to feel that energy of seeing folks that maybe we hadn't gotten to be with over the last few years, given everything. I think having Clarity focus on that in-person experience this year is going to be very exciting. So looking forward to that small bonfire kind of feeling.
Definitely.
Yeah, there's a lot of inspiration that comes with these, but it's also sometimes it's just validation of like, hey, we're not the only ones feeling this. And then if you can like look around a room of people and there's kind of that physical aspect to it, it's a little more personal than just kind of the remote setting where maybe you see some floating heads and maybe you don't.
Yeah. Totally. I get that. And it's one of the reasons why this, like this live stream exists is to, validate the fact that we're all struggling with kind of like the same problems and we're all trying to figure it out together. So yeah, definitely agree with that, Naya. For me, I feel like I left the Silicon Valley 3 years ago now, and obviously it was during COVID and everything. And so like having this opportunity to finally come back to San Francisco and be with, the people would definitely be something I'm looking forward to. When I was in Silicon Valley, and again, before COVID, there used to be also this meetup called the Design System Wednesdays. I know they gonna have like some kind of online conference soon, but the idea of that meetup was really like every month we would meet in a different office space, and we would just talk about, it's very casual, we were just talking about, sometimes it was like 10 people, sometimes it was 30, but it was always nice to be with other design system practitioner and talk about what we're doing now. Anyway, looking forward to it, and definitely recommend if you can to attend in person.
Yeah, I don't know if that was an intentional segue or not, but I'm gonna seize upon it. I'm actually working with Maya and a few of the Seattle folks to get a Seattle local meetup going. We've been working with the team at Drata to host the Chicago meetup for a couple of months now. I'm trying to get a Portland and a NYC meetup off the ground, and a lot of this is about trying to figure out how we can continue to have in-person connection inside of our local communities. One of the most powerful things about driving community in a discipline like this is the ability to spend that time and make those connections month over month. And so if anybody's interested in helping host or set something up, Knapsack's definitely interested in helping out. And so we have a program that works pretty well for these that I'd love to chat with you about. So hit me up, and we'll talk about getting a local group started if you don't already have one. And even if you do, and you're looking for sponsorship, somebody buy beer and pizza, or an event space, let me know.
That's really cool. Thanks, Chris, for helping out the community with this. By the way, Donnie is also giving us the actual date. So the Design System Wednesday Day conference is on the 20th of September. It's free to attend, and it's a virtual event. So, and I think Donnie is talking there, so that's why he knows.
Donnie's everywhere these days. He's blowing up my feed.
Definitely. Okay, a few other gems that I found and I wanted to share with everybody. One is, so this thing is called webglossary.info, and it's basically like over 3,000 terms, to give you obviously definitions, and this one is about card sorting. Cool. I like the idea of having that's interesting, at SPA. I don't know what SPA is. So basically I feel like, and maybe it's also because English is not my first language, but every time I have a resource like that can explain to me certain terms or acronyms that I don't have, feel like a great idea to be more inclusive and basically saying, hey, it's okay, it's normal, you don't know everything, and sometimes you do need a resource to explain to you what is that particular term or concept or something like that. So I like to have this kind of stuff. So good stuff. Also, still on the technical side, but State of CSS 2023 is out. And I think it's first of all, it's super interesting resource, but I think it's also very well made. So the data viz is really, really cool to look at. This one might not be the most interesting.
That's kind of sweet though.
But look at that, it's just beautiful. I just nerd out about data viz and stuff like that, but I just think they're doing a very good job. So definitely would recommend having a look at it when you have the time. And I guess the last one that I want to talk about personally is, obviously, if you want to be part of this this particular live stream, we do have an application. If you want to talk about a subject, the tiny URL is tinyurl.com/dsfg-form, and you can be part of of this wonderful group of people and ask your questions and get discussions going on one particular topic that you would want to talk about. And then I think we have a last thing, but Chris, you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so I interviewed a few folks from the Fido team about passkeys the other day on the Design Systems podcast, and You can check out that episode in a couple of weeks when it comes out. But in terms of the way that they've decided to deliver the PassKey technology is fascinating. And it's the first time I've ever seen this use of a design system. So the FIDO Alliance is a bunch of companies that come together that work on things like security and authentication. And so passkeys is sort of the new thing, right? You've probably seen this if you have a Google account. Google's asked you to create a passkey. 1Password recently rolled this out for like their admin panels. So this is happening, right? We're all basically saying like, let's get rid of passwords and start using passkeys. That's a lot of technical specification. That's a lot of UX. That's a lot of user journeys and stories. And instead of creating like a big ass PDF or something like that, or a microsite to deliver this, FIDO actually built a design system to deliver the passkey specification and user experience. And so it's a little bit thin on the technical side of the patterns here, but there's a lot to this. And it's really fascinating. If you go clicking around in FIDO Alliance /design-system, it is a really cool way of distributing what amounts to a spec. And I had never thought about this use case for a design system before, where this is a consortium, not even a single company, that has built a design system to basically inform users and implementers about how it works and how to use it. Really cool stuff.
Yeah, really cool. I like the fact that they're also calling out accessibility as one of the key.
Yeah, the journeys is like the interesting stuff in here, where you can kind of see like how they lay out sort of the flow of how passkeys actually work.
Wow. Yeah, that is really cool. Well, thanks for sharing, Chris. Very nice.
Yeah, you can check out that podcast. It'll be live, I think, in early November.
Cool. Definitely looking forward to it. Before we jump into like more, like I want to say, meatier topic, Damien was asking if, we would learn about a design system local group for San Diego. I don't know one, but anybody here has been aware of like a local group in San Diego?
Also, Damien, if there isn't one, I'd start one with you. I love working with you. Let's do it.
Okay. Well, yeah. And if I think about it, I will try to, or if somebody has something, in the comments, don't be shy and share the knowledge. Cool. Donnie was also talking about making specs more accessible will get more collaboration and general interest to get involved for sure. So yeah, thanks, Donnie, for your comment there. Cool. What should we talk about? Chris, I feel like you had a topic that is you wanted to mention.
Well, I mean, it's a big part of the reason why we invited Maya on is there is this interesting shift happening inside of the REI design system, which we should totally throw the link out to because it's interesting to browse around and it is public. But Maya's been going through this transition that we talked about on a recent podcast. That is this shift in the way that they're thinking about the modularity of their patterns. And so what I mean by that is, they used to build in very small, discrete modular pieces. And now there's this trend towards more complex, more purpose-built patterns inside of their system. And so I think that Maya is a great person to explore a topic that isn't talked about all that often in design systems. I mean, Alla Komatova's design systems book talks about this continuum of modularity, but it's often kind of an afterthought in the way that we construct these systems. And so I think it'd be cool to explore that for a minute.
Sure. Yeah. And, coming at you from the product perspective here, right? The first thing we're looking at is how do we, the Cedar's been around for 5 years now, right? And we just relaunched our doc site. Thanks for plugging the link in there. We're super proud of that and excited to be able to build on top of that.
It's beautiful and fun. And it's one of my favorite design system examples.
Yeah, it's great. And we have an awesome mascot now. We got some custom illustrations from the design team up at REI as well. So fun to get a little flavor. And, also it's a more extensible platform. So we can do a lot more with our navigation now. We can start to build out sort of more of these patterns and component sections. that's definitely something, you know, we'll have to figure out, is where documentation lives for different types of components. If we get to these more, kind of concrete prescriptive examples of components, there's kind of a different level of documentation needed, and potentially different users as well. If we're kind of enabling somebody to go in via the CMS and apply a component, they don't need to know all the token options and everything, right? We can just provide some of those plug and play solutions where we can as well, and then have the smaller parts available for teams to build as they need, as kind of dual purpose there. But yeah, we've been thinking a lot about, where do we go next? Like, how can we continue to evolve the system? Where is there a need for the business to help really support, you know, efficiency is kind of the top level goal, but also consistency and brand impression, especially for REI. We have a lot of physical stores. We have adventures, classes and events, people that are out in the field, sort of a lot of different kind of product lines within that retail experience, as well as the omni-channel experience as well. So we're constantly like, should we go try to play in the physical space and work on, you know, systems for store signage, or, you know, point of service or point of sale systems? Do we go deep in digital and really provide more capabilities there? And that's kind of what we're looking at now, that you alluded to, Chris, right? We've worked a lot on these really global UI elements and patterns that are core to a lot of design systems. And now we're looking to, what are those larger patterns, those more purpose-built, more opinionated components? How can we get that into something that is reusable enough, maybe not globally reusable, but definitely can help teams have more of a starting point and get to those goals around efficiency and consistency as well. So that's what we're kind of setting up our kind of forward-looking strategy and roadmap around, and then also doing a lot of kind of technical feasibility, like how do we maintain these more structured compositions versus more of a you know, content agnostic component. Well, now, you know, we're going to care about what content goes in there, and how do we start to communicate that and capture that, and, you know, version control, all these other fun parts of the process. So we're very much learning as we go from this, and, you know, trying to be influenced by what other design systems have done as well and where they've seen success.
So what's the big driver of the shift here? I think that's like an interesting idea to explore, like the motivations, because I get what you're doing. And I think it's interesting that it's headed this way. The driver is what I'm really curious about, is like, you know, the idea that more complexity and more purpose-built is better and allows you to have like a stronger singular focus. Because I definitely see that, but I also see this idea about like the less modular you are, the more difficult reuse becomes. And I'm curious to kind of understand more about the drivers.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And that's kind of the balance we're always trying to, you know, maintain as well. I kind of see it as a lot of different kind of technological initiatives coming together at the same time. So we migrated from like a very monolithic website to more of a microsite architecture. This year, we're also migrating to a new content management system that's headless. And so we're starting to have these new opportunities to create more streamlined templates, and then create more streamlined components, more standardized components that go in them. We do, you know, by providing these smaller parts, teams have a lot of flexibility to build, you know, whatever patterns that they need. But the result of that is, you know, it can be inconsistency on the site. And so that impacts, you know, not only the customer experience and some of that brand impression, but also the efficiency of those teams who are spending all this time to, you know, discover, design, test, build out these new components. They're on the hook for ongoing maintenance. And so we're really looking at how can we, you know, leverage these new technologies with our new architecture, our new content management system that, you know, needs that display layer, and, you know, bring it all together to help teams, you know, solve the more complex stuff. And we can solve those really repeatable patterns, you know, things like product grids that you see a lot on retail sites, right? Or film strips, carousels, these types of patterns that aren't, you know, totally unique to a specific use case, but do start to layer in data and content, which is kind of the new space that we're playing in from the design system side, where, as I mentioned before, we've typically provided these more abstracted components and let the teams figure out how the content should be displayed. And now we're trying to figure out how we can package up some more of these compositions. And so there's more consistency and, just kind of a better starting point. But I think managing that complexity within the design system team versus within kind of our consumer teams is the piece that we need to figure out, and to figure out how we can really set up an operating model that isn't going to, slow us down or create kind of a bunch of one-offs that we can't maintain, because we want to continue to provide that value as well.
Yeah, I think about the idea of nobody wants to create a cockpit, right? And so when you sit down and you go to use a component and you're browsing through that component spec, a prop list that's 40, 50, 60 props and 19 different variations for any of them is a proxy for disaster. In that if you need an instruction manual that is as big as your design system to be able to run your singular component, you probably haven't really actually solved anything. And so I'm curious, like, bring me into the room where you're talking about how to manage that kind of complexity, because modular componentry tends to have fewer options that then get extended, whereas like more purpose-built or integrated componentry has a proliferation of spec elements that basically allow you to create all the different variations.
Yeah, so we've been, kind of evaluating a couple different ways that we can approach this. Like, first is kind of our current state where we have smaller parts and then, patterns and guidelines for teams to compose them on their own. We can provide more of those parts. We can look at, what teams are having to create custom or having to recreate multiple times. I think kind of the issue with that is, those, when they're kind of just guidelines or documentation, we don't really have that enforcement mechanism. And we also don't want to be like the design police either. And so is there a way we can bake in more of those decisions? We've looked at kind of, like the mega configurable component, but I think there's a lot of probably more cons than pros to that approach, right? Too, just with maintainability, you start to get code bloat. People are loading a bunch of different, props and whatnot that they're not going to use, which has an overall negative impact. And plus, it's just, it's confusing to, your consumer to know what those options are available. So the path that we're kind of looking at now is really more about compositions and like specific composed instances. So if we are creating all the subcomponents, the smaller parts, even subcompositions, right? Like pairing a heading and a subheading together and trying to, look at introducing more fluid types so it can change from like a big hero to a smaller card, but we have that consistent type pairing, spacing packaged up, and then kind of compose those up into like a specific composed instance. And I think, Christoph, this is where that glossary maybe comes in really handy, because we start to throw out a lot of new terminology. And do we just call everything a component, or do we really get into the nuance of what these are? But how we're thinking about it now is really creating sort of these like, specific instances of a composition that then we can go back and recompose as needed or as things change, or if we do need a slightly different variation. I think the ongoing, management of that is something that we're going to figure out as we go. But that's, I think, the strongest approach that we've had. Would love to hear if you guys have had, any sort of similar situations or how you would approach that as well.
I mean, Catherine, you lived in this world.
Yeah, I feel like for us, one of the things that we found is, given our design system supported very different kinds of products. So we had at DoorDash, we had the restaurant sort of tooling, the more consumer retail side that people interacted with day to day, and then the more sort of functional work of doing deliveries and having the dashers be able to manage that experience. We had very different constraints. And so how we thought about modularity was more in kind of each local space. And so having both partnership within our team, where we had folks that were focused on patterns and modularity that are focused on consumer and retail, versus like dashboarding and sort of tooling for restaurants versus the dasher work. That was the right sort of level of abstraction that helped us have the right reusability within each space and the ability to talk to the other sort of areas that could use new ideas, but also didn't have patterns that maybe didn't make sense in these different sort of use cases. So that was one of the ways that we sort of thought about breaking up the sort of groupings of our system to make sense both modularity wise, but also in terms of sharing ideas when it could help another space, even though they're more different than similar.
As for me, I've seen also an interesting use case where basically our users give us the feedback that the components that were there were actually too big, and they wanted like parts of the component itself. So it was kind of like like having like the more like as you mentioned, like I see that there's an obvious use case to have like more complex components as you grow, but sometimes it happens that actually people I just want that little bit part of thing because I want to be able to reuse it, and I don't have it except in that particular combination of components. And sometimes they're actually available, sometimes they're not, but it's an interesting use case because it's almost like backwards, right? It's like most people actually start with like the smaller bits. I have a hot topic potentially on about this, but what is for you, because we're talking about like different level of abstractions and stuff like that of components, okay, and I've seen, and I have my own opinion about this, but I've seen like, how do you call those things? Does it matter? And like, how do you make sure that things are still discoverable? Does it make sense to hide them in different categories or not? And what is actually something that talks to your user? And particularly, I want to talk about one term, which is pattern, because, and I'm going to start by giving, yeah, exactly. It's on your background, Chris, but for me, and maybe I'm just like thinking too much about it, but one key aspect of the term pattern is it's repeatable. And so for me, because I've seen some of those abstraction, like combination of like smaller components being called patterns, and I disagree with it, but I'm happy to hear what you think, and if you feel like you have a different opinion, I would love to hear where you're coming from.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think pattern is similar to component in that it can be like as big or as small as you want to make it, and it's almost intentionally, kind of vague in that way. We've used patterns more, at least at Cedar, for kind of the user flows that aren't tied to a specific component. So like forms, messages, alerts, notifications, these types of larger patterns where there's not a specific component that's going to deliver it, but there's maybe a sequence of components that come together and create that experience. I will say there was kind of, it took us a while to get to like, what are we calling patterns? And to your point, is that what our consumers expect a pattern to be as well? And so, part of the work on the product side is you're kind of constantly going between, maybe your business audience who is not as technical, and you can speak about components and patterns at a really high level, but then once you start talking to a more technical audience, you do get into the more nuances of, okay, this is a pattern, but it's also something that we could make into a component or a composition, or trying to figure that out. I will say it feels really inconsistent. I think the word that I don't like is organism, and that's one I've been trying to figure out a better term for. Like the whole atomic methodology is great, right? To be able to zoom in and out from the big to the small, but I kind of get caught up when it's like, are we providing organisms, or is there's kind of more to that? And do people even understand what an organism is? If we're like, that's an instance where I feel like pattern is more approachable than trying to introduce something like organism to somebody that's maybe not familiar with that.
Totally. And to give you an example of, I think we're pretty much aligned, but to give you an example of what I think is a pattern is like empty states. It's like, for me, it's a pattern in the sense that it's something that is going to be across, like multiple situations, and potentially are actually handled by different components, but there's still like some design decisions to like solve for a problem in different scenarios that are somewhat repeatable. Or focus state is another pattern for me. It's like it is actually horizontal across different elements, and is still like something that is repeatable across the board, but not particularly a combination of different elements, if you see what I mean. Catherine or Chris, do you have any opinions on this?
Yeah, I think one of the things that you find across organizations is that lots of people have different experiences, and understanding of the terms and words that they use growing up as engineers or designers, I think differs across lots of different people. And so, what I've found in the past when thinking about how do you communicate about ideas and name, certain parts of your design system, is that I think often trying to find the word that comes with the least baggage, that like gives you an opportunity to really sort of define what that thing means in the context of your organization and design system. That often feels like the right choice versus trying to fit something that is a little more loaded or has very different sort of connotations or understanding across different folks' experience. I think that's how I usually approach those problems.
I'm so excited to talk about this one. Being the person that hosted a conference called Patterns, and the person that has, sorry, it's not mirrored, build using patterns on their desk. We always think about a pattern is a repeatable solution to a commonly recurring problem. And so you can take that one of two ways. You can think about that as is a design token a pattern? Or is a component button a pattern? Theoretically, yeah, it is, because it is solving some sort of commonly recurring problem. But how we tend to represent patterns is something that represents a tangible block of user value. And that tangible block of user value is maybe not quite a feature, or maybe it is a feature, but it's something that represents a thing that you can deliver into an app that represents a fully complete experience, that provides some tangible value to a user. In and of itself, a button probably doesn't meet that standard. But a button inside of a card that is a call to action block on a marketing site, that probably does meet that standard. And so patterns tend to favor higher complexity, and they tend to sort of be pointed at this idea of how do we create something that represents a tangible experience that provides value to a user? And those are the commonly recurring problems that we're trying to solve.
Thanks. I think I love your definition. Oh, Catherine is back. I think we lost Catherine for a minute. Hey, Catherine. You're back.
I got booted out for a minute.
No worries. By the way, disclaimer, I have 6 years of philosophy behind me, and I feel like maybe that's why I'm like nerding out on terms like that. So I'm sorry. But apparently
we've been talking about, I've been trying to get my co-founder Evan to write a blog post about this for forever, because he's very strong opinions here, and it's kind of like a foundational thing to what we built with Knapsack. And so there is like room for a well circulated blog post about what the heck is a pattern, in a very similar vein to like what the heck is a design system from 4 years ago, where everybody had like kind of a slightly different definition, and there were like 18 or 20 blogs in like 6 months about that. Like, I think that there's probably room for a what the heck is a pattern.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Okay, maybe we can go back to like another point that I was trying to aim at, is also like, okay, so you have like simple components, and it's already like complex enough to make sure that people actually find them, but adding more component and more complex component. Maya and everybody, I would love to hear what are your thoughts on like, how do you make sure that people can actually are aware that they exist, how they discover it, how they, and obviously as you make like more, more complex stuff, you probably have to come up with also names that are not as obvious as a checkbox. It's like, what is this thing we're going to call it, right? And how do you make sure that people are aware of the naming convention, or maybe the name? Yeah, I mean, the names that you come up with, and to integrate that in the culture of your company.
Yeah, I would love to hear other takes on this. I'll say how we're starting to think about this is, kind of ultimately, I think there's a future where we have, more robust local systems and systems architecture, and teams have, more accountability and responsibility and are part of that process. So they know what's there as part of that. But kind of as the next step that we're thinking is kind of this tiered architecture, right? So building out component library that's specific to a certain user groups, like CMS authors, right? As we're coming online with this new content management system, that these components have specific requirements as well as different user types that are in their authoring in the CMS. And so, I think it is really trying to target some, messaging to those folks, but then also making sure, that's backed up by the tooling. I think for naming, that's an area where, Catherine mentioned kind of going with things that don't have baggage, but I think on the flip side, we can also look at like, where is terminology that people are kind of using consistently today? So we have like cards, and then there's kind of this variant of cards that's a story. And so that's something that I've been trying to ramp up on is, okay, we hear our, site marketers, digital merchandisers talking about things more as stories and really bringing this storytelling aspect to, some of the content on the pages. So they're not just, product tiles everywhere. And so, I see that as kind of a future evolution of card where you have maybe the same elements, but it's designed in a different way that to have, maybe more imagery, a little more copy, more of that storytelling aspect. And so stories are probably not like a common component in design systems. I don't know that I've seen that referenced, but that's, terminology that's understood in-house. And so it probably makes sense for us to jump on that and ride with it. And then other things I think we'll have to figure out. I know we've been looking a lot at film strip, which everybody calls a carousel, but really carousels and film strips are different things. And so there's kind of this learning curve of like, actually, we're not talking about carousel here. We don't really want a carousel. We want the film strip. We want to see like 5 cards and rotate them. We don't want to see just the one focus area. And so there's definitely, an education aspect that goes along with this as well, trying to match the language where we can, but where we're introducing new stuff, trying to figure out what's going to stick.
I like to think about this as like, where does the canonical name lie? And so like naming things is hard. We all know that. There's different teams that because of siloing, isolation, whatever, they name things different things. I was with a customer one time who had a film strip, and their design team called it a film strip, but their engineering team called it a carousel, or a subtype of carousel. And so when you think about like, what name do you use and where does that name live? It lives in the most accessible place, which should be the design system. The design system should be the place that is harmonizing language and ideas and concepts between design and code. And it reminds me of this conversation I had with the engineering manager from Meta a couple of months ago. And I think I brought this up last live stream, where Sriram talks about how the spec is the canonical thing for them. They don't think about Figma as being the source of truth and then converting that source of truth to React at some future point. They think about everybody as a stakeholder gets together and decides on the spec and decides on the names for everything in the spec. And then Figma is just another implementer of that spec, along with React, along with native, along with all these other different types. But the idea is that governing spec is the core piece of information, the core bit of structured data in the design system. And then everything flows from there. It's not design to code, it's spec to everything. And I think that's a really powerful conceptual model for how we could all like get a little practice and a little bit better, because we all kind of know that the days of pixel perfection in things like Figma are behind us. Like nobody's trying to build a comp exactly to spec from a visual design tool, but we're also sort of trapped in this idea of design to code. And I think if we're able to break out of that and say like, no, we all need to agree on a spec first, and then everybody just implements that spec, that's a really powerful way of thinking.
Love that.
Totally.
I really try to, advocate for people understanding, and especially I feel like the implementation in the different libraries, and for me, like Figma is just another implementation now.
Exactly.
And so, yes, and I try to also advocate for like when you're drafting specs, like, yes, it can happen in Figma, but for me, like the spec file and the library are two totally separate things. And documentation is a third one. But yes, I agree with you that the specs in theory, and I feel like the introduction of design tokens actually pushed also to actually think more holistically about the anatomy of the thing that we want to build, and like creating specs and actually, having some kind of naming convention. So you're like, okay, so I'm talking about, we're going to build this thing that has 4 parts. Let's call them A, B, C, and D, and then go on from there. But yeah, it could be like it could be like a written document if you wanted to, but it feels more like close to like, like those patent documents than actually the, like just like a Figma file or whatever design tool you're using.
Yeah, I get super nerdy about this, and that sometimes I think that maybe what we should build at Knapsack is just a really great JSON editor that lets you modify props and specs. And I mean, we kind of have that. It's not like front and center in the app, but I think about that from time to time. And I also think about like the indelible mark that Figma is going to leave on our industry is not the ability to have collaborative design in a browser. It's the ability to get designers to actually care about an implementation of their design and code. And that's the power of variables, in my opinion, is not necessarily that Figma is doing it better, but they're actually getting 80 million users or however many they're at now to really care about how something translates from design to code.
Well, when I think about this problem of consistency between like the different platforms and tools that we all use, like what I found matters the most is less about the language, which I do think is, a job of a design system to help unify and bring that together across different, audiences. But I think being able to have the sort of conceptual unification of like, this is what the boundary of like a component is, and this is its behavior and what it accomplishes. And when you are trying to accomplish a certain thing in your UI, you have to sort of piece together these 3 components. If those boundaries are the same across different platforms, that's what matters more than the sort of language unification to me. And I think with like advances in the sort of tooling that people use in their IDE or through Figma, being able to relate sort of similar terms that people might be searching for in their head of like, okay, is this a carousel or is it a slideshow or what have you? And being able to show the right component, because you can sort of say, okay, this is, another way that someone may call this thing, at the point of usage in Figma or in an IDE. I think we're at a place tooling wise nowadays where that is possible and common. So I think having the exact word between the different platforms maybe matters a little less, but actually having the right sort of conceptual similarities and boundaries between each side, that's the thing that really matters nowadays.
So my favorite use of AI in design systems is discoverability. And the discoverability by relational nature is super fascinating. Like the idea to know that these things are close to one another is really powerful.
Yeah, I'd love to integrate some of that in our documentation site, right? Like we don't have search. That's been on our wish list forever. But like, what if we kind of jump that step and like get excited about chatbots again, but in the way of like, hey, I'm trying to do X. What component should I use? What pattern should I use? What are my options for this or that? And I think that could be a really great way to like help people really self-serve on getting that information when the design system team isn't there to talk, or if you have those questions, we don't have to build out a whole wizard, that type of thing. And I think that would be a really neat way to leverage AI to help discover what's available and help make those decisions about what to use.
I'm going to shamelessly plug Knapsack for just a quick second here. Because it's an interesting story. So one of the things that we were thinking about when you create like a novel length work that is a design system is how do you actually find stuff in it if you weren't the creator, the author? And so we related this to a problem that I was facing in tabletop gaming, where I play a game system called Blades in the Dark. It's a great system. The rulebook is super arcane and super difficult to navigate. So we fed the Blades in the Dark PDF into an AI bot that allows me to type simple questions about things I want to know inside of the rulebook, and then returns to me the answer and the page number. And so we use that as sort of the model inside of Knapsack for how we think about asking your own design system questions. And it's super cool to basically be like, I need something that denotes a user action that can be clicked on, that can be embedded inside of other components. And it would return to you like, have you thought of the button? And so that's been sort of the conceptual model that we've gone with for that is really interesting as a way to explore and discover things inside of your design system.
Sounds great. And yes, I feel like there's a lot of thoughts going around about this thing because, yeah, definitely, like I think Maya, you mentioned also the fact that you were, I think, investing in a Headless CMS, something like that for your documentation, right? And so for me, like the next step is how do you interrogate that Headless CMS with, like some kind of AI or bot or whatever, so that it, like for me, like I always have that image of like, ultimately a design system is kind of like a guide that is sitting on your shoulder and that is able to, like guide you and answer your question when you have them, as an individual contributor. And so what are the ways that we can actually emulate that? For me is like, this is probably like next step is, as you described, Chris, is like being able to ask question to some kind of AI bot and say, how do we do that again? And so, and have directly like an answer as if, that person was there. I think we have a comment here, Henry. With that in documentation, I'm kind of excited about formatting possibility, like taking some content and having it bullet points, diagram, or poem, all generated. Yeah, exactly. That's the point, right?
Well, I think one of the really cool things there is like, what if you were able to just point some generative AI at your code repo and have it auto document your components for you, or write tests for all your components for you? That's not that far away. And I think that like that's the really cool use of a lot of the generative capabilities is like, why write a bunch of docs when you could have a bunch of docs written for you? And even if like the AI generated stuff is only 80% of what you want, it's a really great starting place for all those poor people that have to write a lot of docs.
Yeah, I mean, the first draft is probably like the most, exhausting part of it, I think. So yeah, always going from 0 to 1 is probably where you have the more inertia. So yeah, I totally agree.
And you could do it all in haiku if you want.
Maya, I have maybe one question for you still, like about this idea of like having more complex components. How do you have any process already in place to say, what is the difference between, hey, like this particular team wants to create that component and that's cool, but that's cool for them. And does it necessarily have to be part of your design system or not? And do you have like, I don't know, like different level of adoption, like saying, for example, it's a snowflake, it's going to be used only once in all of our products. So nope. But then, like it's after that, it gets a little bit like murkier, I feel. So how do you think about that?
Yeah, it does. I mean, we certainly, want to look for adding things to the design system, especially at that global level that can be reused by multiple teams. I think what we're hoping to figure out with kind of a tiered system where we start to introduce new component libraries, then we can have kind of different, restrictions, if you will, for what goes in there and, make it more accessible for contributors. Whereas, something that goes into core is really kind of intended to be very durable and not change very frequently and have that reuse potential. But something that goes into more of a specific component library for a platform or a specific user group, I think we don't have to have those same standards. We can kind of have that separation of concerns and try to figure out how we can have a more fluid contribution model, not only contributing new stuff that our team would just have to maintain, but also like, can we federate some of that maintenance as well? Because that's, I think, the sticking point where teams often will build the one-off component because that's the faster approach, but then they don't want to maintain it for another team or even for themselves in the future. They may just recreate it because it's faster than trying to go back and reconfigure something. And so I think there's always going to be those kind of special snowflakes, like in REI, we have, big promotional moments, big sales, things that do kind of require, a not typical experience to draw that extra attention. But then a lot of the times there are things that can be reused. And so how can we work better with contributions so that we're kind of evolving that core global level, but then also those larger patterns or organisms or whatever we want to call them, how can we extend that to teams as well so they can become more part of the process and help maintain that as those patterns change more quickly.
Thanks. That's super interesting. Catherine, Chris, anything to add on that?
For once, I don't really have much. I mean, I thought that was a great statement.
Cool. And Henry is saying something I've been seeing recently is UI development via design systems. So a project looking to build a new rec, then building that new component directly in the DS. Not sure how I feel about it.
I think it's the future. Like, I think that especially when it comes to composition, like we're going to use a lot less Figma. And the big reason why is because our ability to manipulate code directly is going to become so easy that there's going to be very few advantages to design tools. And if you think about like the core purpose of a design tool, the core purpose of a design tool is that it's a faster, more rapid way to iterate without having to write a bunch of things in code. And so it's faster iteration, it's easier experimentation, et cetera, et cetera. Now, we'll still always have that for new features and new things that have some complexity and some experimentation that needs that fast iteration. But if we're talking about iteration within components that we've already created or components that we just need to modify slightly, there's very few advantages and, in fact, some disadvantages in having to continue to do design to code. And so design to code is a painful part of handoff that exists in every single organization. It's time consuming, it's expensive, it's error prone. There's all sorts of issues with taking something that's a visual medium and putting it into a structured code medium. And so the moment that we can get rid of that, there's an incredible amount of power that you unlock. Now, we're not going to be able to ferret it out completely, nor should we. I think that there absolutely is a place for design tools in perpetuity. But the reality that we should first open up Figma every time we want to create something seems silly in a future where snapping together a bunch of components and composing a feature is trivially is a trivial difference between doing it in a design tool.
Right on. Cool. We're almost at time, so I want to make sure that we have time. First of all, I think Chris, you wanted to actually come back to something that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I forgot. We're presenting and sponsoring the Coho conference this year. It's a career conference talking a lot of engineering, product design, data science. There's an AI lean to it, kind of like everything these days. But check it out. It's an interesting conference that's very much focused adjacently to design systems. Some great speakers, some great folks. We're also throwing a little in-person shindig in New York City if you happen to be around and want to come check it out. It's on the I believe second to last day of the conference. And so, yeah, come on by, check it out, take a look. I'm speaking, my co-founder's speaking. We're talking about AI and design systems. So come on by. Really
cool. Thanks for sharing. Maya, thank you very much for being with us today. And yeah, thanks for bringing all that insight and knowledge from your side. Yeah, I'm going to just show you can actually sign up for Coho through Knapsack. Cool.
When's the next one of these, Christoph? Are we doing October 4th?
Yes, I think we're trying to do every first Wednesdays. So the next one should be October 4th. Looking forward to it. As I mentioned before, if you want to be part of that, you can also sign up to actually, talk about any topic. If you have any question, we'll be happy to have you join the live stream. Maya, thanks again for being with us today. And yeah, I hope you'll come back another time.
Yeah, great to talk to you guys this morning. Thanks for the invite.
Yeah, really, 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 really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. It's guests like you that make it so that it's not just the three of us talking to each other.
Thank you for joining.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Thank
Have
you.
a great day.
Thank you all. See you. Bye.
Bye.